For years, the truth stayed hidden, the victims forgotten, the cases left cold, until science revealed what time could not. This is Decades in the Dark, where cold cases are brought back to light. On the night of February 22, 2000, 18-year-old Michelle O'Keefe sat alone in her blue Ford Mustang in a quiet parking lot in Palmdale. She was sitting in her car in her softball uniform, waiting for her coach. Michelle had arranged to meet him there for late evening batting practice, something that wasn't unusual during softball season, especially for athletes trying to get extra reps in around school, work, and shared field schedules. Night practices in public lit lots near batting cages and training areas weren't uncommon. She never made it home. Someone walked up to her car, fired a single shot into her chest, and disappeared into the darkness. What followed was a case that would haunt investigators for years, not just because Michelle's killer remained free, but because police believed they had already found him. They arrested a security guard, they built their case, they nearly destroyed his life, and they were wrong. This is the story of how an innocent man became the center of a murder investigation, and how DNA would eventually expose the real killer. This is the murder of Michelle O'Keefe. Michelle was the kind of person people described the same way every time: driven, kind, and impossible not to notice. She was a senior at Palmdale High School, a talented softball player, and someone with big plans for her future. Friends said she was disciplined and focused. She worked hard, stayed busy, and took her goals seriously. She wanted to join law enforcement one day. Some reports say she was considering becoming a probation officer. Others said she wanted to work in criminal justice. Either way, she was someone who believed in responsibility and structure. She liked order. She liked purpose. She lived with her family in the Antelope Valley area of Southern California and stayed close to them. She was especially close with her younger brother, and like many teenagers balancing school, sports, and work, her days were packed. That Tuesday had been normal. School, practice, plans. Nothing about it suggested it would be the last day of her life. That evening, Michelle drove to a parking lot near the Hollywood Video in Palmdale, a place near the intersection of 47th Street East and Avenue S. It was an area people used for park-and-ride commuting, but at night it was mostly quiet. She parked her blue Mustang and stayed inside, still wearing her softball uniform, waiting for her coach to arrive. At some point, someone approached her car. Investigators believe Michelle may have had her driver's side window partially down, either because she was waiting, talking to someone, or because the person approaching didn't seem threatening at first. That detail would matter, because the killer didn't force their way inside. They walked up to the car and fired a single shot into her chest at close range. At around 9:00 p.m., nearby security guard Raymond Lee Jennings heard what sounded like a gunshot. When Michelle was discovered, she was slumped inside the Mustang. She had been shot once. Her purse was still there. Her keys were still there. Her car had not been taken. There were no obvious signs of a violent struggle. This didn't look like a random attack. It looked deliberate. The murder shocked the community immediately. An 18-year-old girl sitting alone in her own car, still in her softball uniform, gone in seconds. Police moved fast, and almost immediately their attention turned to one man, Raymond Jennings. Jennings was a 27-year-old security guard working nearby that night. Because he was one of the closest people to the crime scene, investigators questioned him early. Almost immediately, they felt something was off. His timeline of events changed. In one version, Jennings said he heard a loud popping sound but assumed it was something minor and continued his patrol. Later, he described it more clearly as sounding like a gunshot. He also changed details about where exactly he was standing when he heard it, whether he was near the video store area, walking the lot, or closer to another section of the property. His timeline about when he checked the area also shifted. At one point, detectives believed he delayed checking on the sound longer than he first admitted. There were also inconsistencies about when he first saw Michelle's car, and whether he had noticed anything suspicious before police became involved. To investigators, these weren't small memory issues. They looked like someone trying to adjust a story. They also thought his emotional reaction seemed strange. Instead of appearing visibly shaken or urgent, they felt he was too calm, too flat, and not reacting the way they expected someone would after discovering a murder scene nearby. He also made comments they considered unusual, and his explanations during interviews became inconsistent enough that detectives started believing he was lying rather than confused. Once that suspicion started, every detail began to look worse. Then came the issue of gunshot residue. Testing suggested possible gunshot residue particles on Jennings's hands. To investigators, that sounded like proof. But gunshot residue is more complicated than it sounds. Residue can transfer. If someone touches a surface where residue exists, like a patrol car, a security desk, a firearm handled by someone else, or even an area where officers had already been working, it can move from object to person. It can also come from completely innocent contact with security equipment, law enforcement environments, or contaminated testing conditions. In Jennings' case, the evidence wasn't a clear smoking gun. It was a possibility. But because police were already leaning toward him, it became treated like confirmation. He was arrested. And once the arrest happened, public opinion shifted fast. To many people, the case seemed solved. Young woman murdered, security guard nearby, suspicious behavior, possible forensic evidence. Done. But beneath that certainty, the case had serious cracks. Jennings had no clear motive, no known relationship with Michelle, no evidence he had targeted her, and the forensic evidence was far weaker than it sounded. Still, prosecutors moved forward. Jennings was charged. His life changed overnight. He became the face of Michelle's murder. For years, he lived under that accusation. And Michelle's family, desperate for justice, were forced to believe the system had found the right person. But not everyone was convinced. Defense attorneys challenged the investigation aggressively. They argued police had developed tunnel vision, that once they focused on Jennings, they stopped seriously pursuing other leads. And there were other leads, including another man whose name would become far more important years later, Hector Manuel Ramirez. Ramirez had a violent criminal history. He had committed armed robberies. He had a background involving weapons and serious offenses, and critically, he had connections to the area. But early in the case, he was not treated as the primary suspect. Investigators were already committed to Jennings. The prosecution against Jennings dragged on for years. The legal process was long, painful, and public, and eventually the case against him began to collapse. The evidence simply wasn't strong enough. Witness reliability became a problem. Forensic certainty faded under scrutiny, and the deeper the case was examined, the less solid it looked. Jennings was acquitted. But acquittal doesn't erase suspicion. Even after walking free, his name remained tied to Michelle's murder. For many people, doubt lingered. If not him, then who? That answer came from something that had changed criminal investigations forever: DNA. As forensic science improved, evidence from Michelle's case was re-examined. Technology had advanced far beyond what investigators had in 2000. Tiny biological traces that once meant nothing could now identify someone. And this time, the evidence pointed away from Jennings. It pointed to Hector Ramirez. Ramirez was already serving time for unrelated violent crimes. He had committed armed robberies and had shown a pattern of dangerous behavior. As investigators looked deeper, the case against him became stronger and stronger. Eventually, prosecutors concluded what should have happened years earlier. They had the wrong man. Ramirez was charged with Michelle's murder. The theory became clearer. This was likely a robbery attempt, or an opportunistic violent encounter that escalated into murder. Michelle had simply been alone at the wrong place at the wrong time. No grand conspiracy. No hidden personal relationship. Just one violent decision that changed everything. In 2014, more than a decade after Michelle's death, Hector Ramirez pleaded no contest and was sentenced to decades in prison. For Michelle's family, it brought some form of justice. But it also brought another kind of pain. The realization that years had been lost, chasing the wrong person. And for Raymond Jennings, the damage could never be fully undone. Even exoneration doesn't return stolen years. It doesn't erase headlines. It doesn't rebuild trust. It simply changes the official ending. Michelle should have been preparing for college, for adulthood, for the life she planned. Instead, she became an example of how fragile justice can be when investigators become too certain too quickly. Her case is remembered not only because of how she died, but because of how close the system came to getting it permanently wrong. A young woman murdered in a parking lot. An innocent man nearly buried by suspicion. A real killer hiding behind investigative certainty, and a family forced to wait years for the truth. Michelle O'Keefe was only 18 years old. She should have had decades ahead of her. Instead, she became part of a case that proved something investigators never like to admit. Sometimes the most dangerous suspect is the one they decide on too early. This is Decades in the Dark, where science brings the past to light. Subscribe for more stories where justice never expires.